Kenwendo from Botswana, who was appointed as the Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry. So in a sense, there are positives, right? We are actually moving, we are seeing some strides. But at the same time, particularly when you're talking about young women. Next slide. We have to contend with the violence that actually exists and that also serves as an impediment for young women to actually participate in political leadership. So this is an image of a young woman in South Africa who was a member of the African National Congress, who was killed. And this literally sort of, these political killings and the political culture that's inherent in the political spaces, some of it is actually linked up to this basically dangerous patrimonial clientele network of men who actually put their friends in power so that they're able to continuously access state resources. So in instances where women actually come into power and challenge those arrangements, it tends to become very violent, and in some instances, unfortunately, fatal for a lot of women. So these are the conditions that young women and other women have to find themselves in when they move into the political space. And then, of course, next slide. And then, of course, we know in terms of political funding, quite evident, right? So very, very much gendered. The brotherhood, the networks, in a sense of women not necessarily having had this privilege of having these networks that enable them to access funding. But however, one of the ways that we can respond to this is one of which I think in some instances this has already been done, like for instance in the case of Kenya, where there's capacitation in terms of increasing women's abilities to fundraise for their own political campaigns. But then also, remember in particularly when you think about the liberation struggle, and specifically with Kwame Nkrumah, about how literally women also financed or contributed. And I think this has largely been throughout the continent, not just him, where women have been finding ways of financing the revolution through ways of donations, etc. And I think this crowdfunding approach is not necessarily new. It's something that we could adopt from what had already been happening already. And then, of course, then we have women who then make it into the state, right? And a lot of the young feminists who make it into the state, and once they are there, the feminist fire somewhat becomes quelled. And this links up to what I was saying yesterday, that there's something fundamentally problematic about the state that makes transformation very, very difficult, right? And we've also had situations where if there are dissenting voices from women in the political parties, there tends to be punishment for them. And I think next slide, please. This particular example, now the previous slide, this one, yes. This particular example of 19 women members of parliament who were expelled, particularly here in Tanzania, right, is somewhat of a reflection of this. Next slide, please. And another reflection of dissenting voices that become punished within the political space is in the form of the example of Nkosazana Zuba, who challenged, very much she went against the grain in terms of voting against the president in South Africa, and consequently led to her demotion. And demotion, basically, she was relegated to a particular ministry that nobody else actually takes seriously. Although it is quite important work because she's actually in the women, youth, and sort of people living with disabilities. But the fact that she's literally been placed within the presidency, that in itself, right? So as a form of demotion in a sense. So women who actually go against the grain tend to be punished, and it really does not matter how powerful you are. And this is another phenomenon that we are seeing as well, where former member of parliament, Lindiwe Sisulu, who's a member of the African National Congress, who argued, again, was contesting for presidency last year, contesting for the presidency, the main ruling party's presidency. And part of the logic, of course, and literally highlighting this, which literally is a phenomenon throughout the continent, is that men in political parties actually believe that the presidency tends to be reserved for them. So this is not something that's unique only to South Africa. So what should be done? Next slide, please. We have gender quotas for women, right? And yet, all of us are aware that the majority of women, or rather the majority of people in our population tend to be women, and then a lot of the times men don't always make up more than 50% of the population through the various countries that we have. So essentially, maybe what we need is a gender quota for men, meaning there has to be a limitation in terms of representation, over-representation of men in politics, right? Are we all in agreement, comrades? Amanda, yes. We are in agreement. Dictatorial democracy. We are all in agreement that men cannot make up more than 50% of representation in leadership. So therefore, it should be instituted throughout. We need a gender quota for men. And that, in a sense, will be able to help us respond to this normalization of the dominance of men in the political sphere. So, siyavuma, comrades. Amanda. and hopefully, next slide, please. And once we're able to do that, and of course, not just reforming or dealing with the quota system, but also reforming the electoral systems that we have in our continent, we will be able to address this crisis. Yeah? So we'll be able to address this crisis. But now, just going back, so now imagine that we have addressed this crisis. Now we have a lot of 50% representation in the next summit where we have women leaders there. The problems that African women face will still continue. Right. Next slide. And largely because we need to understand that African women are diverse, right? So you have more contemporary urban women, we have women who are literally operating and living in the rural areas, we have women who are professionals, we have women who are, working class women, literally an entire diversity of women in our continent. And I think in as much as this, somewhat has been a challenge, particularly in terms of having a homogenized African feminist movement, it is also an opportunity for us to somewhat learn and imagine and think of ways that we can actually respond to the challenges that we have in intersectional ways. So, thus far, next slide. African feminists. So they got it together and they were like, okay, in the attempt to see if we can actually form a feminist movement in the continent, what really would this constitute? And there was a conversation, so there was a convening that was done by the FES in 2017, and they found that, of course, there are various issues that African women have to contend with. Like, for instance, some of the issues that were highlighted, the challenges that women tend to face in West Africa, would then be, issues of witchcraft, motivating women to participate in political leadership. I'm not going to read all of these. All right, but then, so some of the challenges, for instance, in terms of religious fanaticism that women have to contend with, breaking silence in terms of giving visibility to women's opinions, the countering of negative cultural impact on women's rights, like FGM, etc. So, and also, there's so many, next slide. There's so many other issues, right? Really diverse issues that are somewhat unique to the various regions, which then consequently have implication in terms of us forging a continental feminist movement. So in Central Africa here, as you can see, some of the challenges that feminists have been highlighting were, again, deepening some of the elitist character of the feminist movement, countering the culture of silence, right, etc. But then the other thing as well, which seems to be, again, taboo, also highlighting the different and diverse and contentious issues and somewhat divergent issues that African feminists have to deal with, is then, for instance, what you find in Southern Africa, apart from racism, which sometimes a lot of other Africans feel like we cannot relate. You're talking about, but we don't relate, right? And then also the LGBTQI community, right? Of which not too long ago in this very room, it was stated that the LGBTQI rights is actually considered human rights in the West, but then in Africa it's actually considered blasphemy, right? So all of these issues that are really diverse and contingent that we also need to be mindful of in terms of understanding the diversity of issues that are facing African women, and then we'll have to find ways of responding to those. However, on the good side, is that Irrespective of all these differences, irrespective of all these challenges and divergences, young African women have been coming together and they've made these demands. And I think all of you will actually find this document on the African Union website. All right, where they are demanding economic justice, criminalization of gender-based violence, calling for the end and demise of discrimination, basically calling for justice, sexual and reproductive health rights, etc. Right, and the reason why I'm highlighting all of this, because even in some of the responses, like for instance, the need for justice and protection with regards to security, all right, from the state. The other thing that we need to understand is that sometimes also the state can be a modality of violence against the very same women that it's supposed to protect. Right. So, and then the other thing that we need to be mindful of, next slide please, has been the problem of the aid and stare approach. Now that I've had this part of the presentation, I'd like to move on to the next one. Next slide please. And now my proposition is, what we need to do is somewhat introduce this, and this is what also African women have been doing, so a decolonial feminist approach to democratization. And I want us to actually be able to differentiate and understand the differences between decolonization and decoloniality, right? So decoloniality has been defined as a political process of gaining independence, which basically ended up with the demise of administrative and legal colonization, all right? However, coloniality, unfortunately, has been the continuation of cultural, institutional, systematic, cultural, and ideological apparatuses that characterize colonialism, and these actually continue to shape us today. And not too long from now, you'll be able to understand why I'm sharing this. So, but then for us then to understand, in order for us to really critique and understand what really happened with colonialism, we have to ask ourselves, what fundamentally was colonialism? Next slide. Amos Césaire managed to help us answer this, right? So he essentially said colonization basically is equivalent to thinification. And then he went to say in his book on discourse on colonialism is that they talk to me about progress. I'll read his quote. They talk to me about progress, achievements, diseases cured, improved standards of living, which then speaks to this idea of modernity that has been brought by colonizers. But however, for me as an African, right, in as much as there's modernity, but there's also coloniality, which is the underside, the darker side of that modernity, which literally led to societies being drained of their essence, their cultures were trampled upon, their institutions were undermined, their lands were confiscated, their religions were smashed, the magnificent artistic creations they were destroyed, extraordinary possibilities were wiped out. When we talk about coloniality, is that I'm talking about the natural economies that have been disrupted, harmonious and viable economies that were adapted to the indigenous population, about food crops were destroyed, malnutrition was permanently introduced, agricultural development that is only orientated towards benefiting the metropoles, and the looting of our raw materials. This is essentially what colonialism was, and actually coloniality even to today. So even if we do empower women, right, and we put women into public office to be able to bring about, these are the issues that we'll have to contend with. And the minute we really understand this, it's important for us. So essentially, coloniality is a power system characterized by a patriarchal, Western-centric, Christian-centric, capitalist, Christian-centric, homophobic, Islamophobia, sorry, right, capitalist system. It is characterized by gender, class, and race, among other hierarchies, are entangled together within a global geopolitical, geocultural processes of the modern colonial world capitalist system, where ceaseless accumulation is affected by these hierarchies. So essentially, our sense of progress is continuously accumulation, but that accumulation also comes with the underside, right, which is essentially modernity. And then we need to understand that. So when the women in Nigeria or Ogoni, they are actually protesting, when people in Marikana, or the workers in Marikana were protesting, it's largely embedded in this particular logic of the global economy, which essentially this is what African feminists seek to confront. Next slide. Next slide. Oh. Oh no, I just read this. So basically coloniality is, okay, yes. You want the other slide, the previous slide? Oh, it was not on. Apologies. Pardon? Oh. So coloniality, so we have coloniality of power, and this is more on academic level, right? So we're giving us a framework of analysis to understand what is really essentially happening in order for us to respond. So for me as a decolonial scholar, so coloniality is more of a framework of analysis that I utilize to understand the world. It is a framework of analysis that I utilize to understand what is happening in Africa. And then once we're able to understand and dissect what is really happening or the crisis of our own continent, and not just Africa only, but sort of the crisis of our world, is that we'll then be able to really come up with effective responses to that particular crisis, right? And this is where the concept, right, in itself of coloniality of power, coloniality of knowledge, coloniality of being, then comes into place. So I'm just going to help somewhat explain this in a pictorial form, all right? So we know that the world is characterized, right, to have this sort of global, next slide, yes, this one, yeah. The global capitalist system, which is basically characterized by a global division of labor, right? Basically, again, centered around this idea of profit making, profit generation. And a lot of the times what we are seeing in countries or regions and continents and peripheries such as Africa, labor tends to be treated differently in comparison to labor in other parts of the world, right? So in a sense, for instance, what we have, the different existing forms of labor that coexist, human trafficking as an example, overexploitation of workers, and in South Africa, for example, in cases where workers are actually demanding fairness, they tend to be killed. And then you have then the idea of coloniality of power, which is basically characterized by the interstate political economy, political military organization, which tends to be controlled by the West. And a lot of the times, as we have seen in Libya, when NATO did what it did in Libya, right? And then, of course, the existing foreign military bases that we find here in the continent. So another example of coloniality of power is the use, thank you, is literally the use of force to coerce those who are marginalized to consent to their oppression. And again, African states with African military and security are the ones complicit, right? They're actually the ones who are involved. These are images. This particular, next image. Next image. So this one is in South Africa. This one, that's in South Africa. So I think that's currently, I know some of you have been seeing some of the images in Kenya, right? So again, so this, what's this overproduction of the violence in terms of a mechanism of the state, that is the reality that we have to deal with. Again, this is part of coloniality, inherent part of coloniality, and for us to understand it, it's important for us to understand this. So I have 5 minutes, I'm gonna rush through the rest of my slides. Next slide, please. And then we have coloniality of being, right? All of us are aware of white privilege. We know this, right? I'm not going to regurgitate what has been written here. But then also we saw this with what happened with Ukraine, with some of our students, basically, right? The privileging in terms of white bodies over the black bodies in terms of, those who needed to be rescued out of Ukraine. Again, the normal, right, reality of our everyday lives. And of course, even this thing that we take for granted in terms of representation of what God actually looks like. All right? So, right? It's embedded in this coloniality, right? Coloniality of being, including as well simple things that we really take for granted in terms of the toys that our children actually have to play with, right? Some of the dolls that they have to play with, again. So reinforce this idea of Eurocentric aesthetics, whereby basically all things beautiful actually must be white. And consequently, what we are seeing, so many other challenges that we've witnessed in the continent. Next slide, please. Another example, a component of coloniality of being is coloniality of religion. Right, again. Or coloniality of gender, sorry. Where it seems so normative that men must be the ones who dominate over women, right? And then also we're seeing this in the private sector as well, where in terms of, for some reason, the same work that women do with men tends to be actually underpaid, and then women tend to be engaged in excessive labor in comparison to men, generally because of the gender role. So it's, again, this is part of coloniality in terms of, if you ask then speaking about coloniality of being, with regards to the gender hierarchies that exist, right? Can I have the next slide? So, and then again, we have religious hierarchies, okay? So, as we are seeing here, and this is somewhat also, again, negating the fact that we have other traditional religious systems that have been wiped out, and we also have indigenous religious systems by Africans that tend to be also looked down upon by us in the very room here. Right? And again, these are religions that actually Africans themselves practice, but for some reason they do not find the same privilege and equal status as the other dominant religions such as Islam and Christianity in the continent. Next slide. So another example of coloniality of being would be the sexual hierarchy. I don't even need to speak to this one, right? It's so obvious. No, in a sense of in terms of how normative homophobia is, right? And that is literally endemic in, again, it is constitutive of this idea of coloniality, all right? And remember, a lot of the homophobic laws are actually the laws that we inherited from colonialism. That's the other thing that we also need to be mindful of, right? And then, so next slide. And then we then have the aspect of coloniality of knowledge, which essentially is about privileging Western knowledges and theories. Yesterday we were talking about democracy, debating democracy. All right, we're also talking about development as well, but ideas and notions of development as well tend to be from outside, tends to be from those who are telling us that this is what development has to be. And we also have been seeing this, for example, in terms of some of the Washington consensus, right? And some of the structural reforms that a lot of feminists and political economists and other developmental scholars in the continent have been critiquing that have been the source of our suffering today, right? So the structural policies that we literally had to be forced to take. Essentially, this is the world that we live in. Next slide, please. And then we have coloniality of the media. So apart from the fact that the global media is dominated by imperial organizations, but a lot of them have this particular ideological orientation that tends to be characterizing them. But anyway, in a last sense, what I'll do is I'll just leave that because my moderator is here. Even if we bring about women into leadership without addressing coloniality, we are not going to bring about the fundamental change that we need in the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much for appreciating that very elaborate discussion by Dikeledi Mokoena. I'd now like to invite Inam El-Tayeb from Sudan to talk about institutions for the democratic movement in Africa. Please welcome her.
Hopefully. Okay, yes, it's working. Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Inam El-Tayeb. I'm from Sudan. Yes, I've come from there, the conflict area. Okay. Can you hear me now? Is it clear?
Can I hold this for you?
Okay, I can take it. Okay. We have been resisting in the past couple of years in all forms, but I will be talking today about one form, which is our resistance committees. Okay. We have fought for several years, as you all know, and we have this famous logo. It says freedom, peace, and justice. But to be able to do that, we have to resist. The Sudanese Resistance Committee is an unorganized body with an unelected leadership council and branches in many towns and across the country. Oh, I don't know. Yes, I don't know. Maybe it's not working. Yes. So, yeah, do that. Okay. Sorry. So, it has social media pages with 2,500 likes, while individuals down have their own pages. These groups is one of the signatories of Declaration of Freedom and Change, which expresses the vision of the civil society groups and oppositions political parties of the country. Okay. The committees began to work on unorganized ground in 2017 with a graffiti campaign. It distributed tens of thousands of pamphlets that reflect issues faced by the committees, such as water access and government land seizures. At the time, graffiti was dangerous. The area would be watched, and for 3 days after the graffiti is finished, we would bury the canister, says one of the resistance committees. Next slide. By December 2018, there were over 300 active resistance groups in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. But as the protests began, dormant groups began to raise and connected with larger established committees. On the 18th of December 2018, a series of demonstrations broke out in several Sudanese cities due in part of raising cost of living and deterioration of the economic condition at all levels of society. The protest quickly turned from demanding from urgent economic reforms into demand of the President Omar al-Bashir to step down. The Sudan 2018 revolution was a remarkable example of nonviolent action in work. Activists were organized and disciplined despite the challenging circumstances resulting in the President Omar al-Bashir resignation. The 2018 revolution was the third of the Sudanese in the Sudan modern history. They all have followed with patterns of ousting a dictator and followed by a transitional period. The Sudanese Resistance Committee signed the January 2019 Declaration of Freedom Charter, which called the President Omar al-Bashir to be removed from the power. In February as well, when the Sudanese Professional Association began calling for the neighborhood-based marches, groups began to mobilize inside the neighborhood and inform the committee with other neighborhoods as well. During the protest, the Resistance Committee loosely coordinated with the Sudanese Professional Association via online social media network services while retaining their autonomy. This is a picture from Adbara train, which arrived to Khartoum in support of the December 2018 revolution, coordinated by the Adbara Resistance Committee. A political analyst said that, or described the Resistance Committee as one of the main players in the political dynamics of Sudan after the revolution. I will show you a video of how was our revolution. This is happy protesters cheering and chanting, and they were saying, "Good morning, good morning." And this is how we were treated. Sorry for the video might be a little bit disturbing. You can play the next video. The Sudanese resistance committees has called for marches to demand the handover of the power for the civilians. And then you can play the next video while I'm talking. We had the Million March. It's a mass demonstration. They were
Less than
okay, you can just play
it. Of Khartoum and in cities all over the country. Less than a month after the massacre, tens of thousands of Sudanese were back on the streets of Khartoum and in cities all over the country.
So this was the Million March. Demonstrators, it was the first since the security forces on June 3rd killed more than 100 people during the bloody dispersal of the sit-in of the protesters outside the military headquarters, the focal point of the protesters struggling for democracy. 2 years after that, this happened again. You can play the video.
And we begin with some breaking news coming in from Northeast Africa with reports of a military coup underway in Sudan. International flights to the capital Khartoum have been suspended while the internet has been cut.
The October 21 military coup. The resistance committee were active in organizing protests, including the November nationwide protest in which security forces shot the protesters dead.
And we begin with some breaking news.
Next slide, please. The Transitional Military Council argued that actions were against the law and norms and constituted a full crime against the citizens of violating their freedom and preventing them from practicing their normal life. Again, we woke up on something different this time. Next slide, please. You can play the video. On April 2013, in April 2013, 2023, a conflict took place between the Rapid Support Forces and Sudan Armed Forces. The resistance committees organized logistic support for medical services, as well the resistance committees coordinated the creation of doctor, nurses, and engineers committees, helped to provide fuel, electric supplies, and take doctors to hospitals in the conflict, and helped in evacuating civilians from areas of RSF and SAF fightings. The resistance committee members were actively and politically encouraged local communities to avoid siding with either the RSF or staff, and they also sprayed anti-war messages on walls. Okay. At the start of the conflict, there were 88 hospitals operating around Khartoum. By the 20th of May, 61 had closed, and some were bombed. Some resistance committees have opened hospitals, and they reopened them, and they demand, and even the ones that were damaged by the airstrikes, or the staff fleeing them. They created emergency rooms to help the injured and chronically ill civilians. Also, the committees have coordinated the evacuation of civilians from the frontline areas, repairing electric system to restore power and medical centers. And locating and returning missing people, a sign when we demonstrate, we say, we are the people, who are you? Thank you, guys.
I think those two presentations have already provoked us greatly, and we only have one presentation left. One of our speakers couldn't make it for this morning, and so our last presenter is Dr. Jimmy Sentogo, and he is going to present from Uganda around art, pop culture.
Good morning to you. As introduced, I'm Jimmy Sentogo from Uganda, where I work as a lecturer at Makerere University. I teach philosophy, but I'm also an editorial cartoonist with a national newspaper. I only have 20 minutes to speak about my topic, which is quite a heavy one. A friend advised me that he had devised a method. Whenever he was invited to speak and was given a few minutes, he had small pieces of sweets that he would put in the mouth, and he knew that by 15 minutes they would have dissolved, and that's when he would stop. But then one time, he spoke and spoke for almost an hour, and the sweet was not dissolving. That's when he realized, when he pulled it out, that he had put a button instead of a sweet. So I had to make sure that I put a sweet, not a button, and it has started dissolving. Now, being in this place is quite nostalgic talking about this particular topic. I studied in Tanzania for 2 years, just next door there in Mosh. I had intended to become a priest, but God thought otherwise. Yeah, but why this brings back particular memories at this occasion and talking about art, pop culture, and social movements, which I'm not going to go into defining. It reminds me of moments at the seminary. Every evening after prayers, a priest would communicate something. But at times, some of the communications, it was a seminary, some of the communications they would make were not really favorable. We didn't want to hear what they were telling us. So we had developed a habit that whenever they communicated something we did not want to hear or that we felt was unfair, we would end with a particular song, and that was "We Shall Overcome." And we would sing it so loud, the priest was uncomfortable behind, because they would sit behind and would say, "We shall overcome someday." And the priest would be uncomfortable, but he would have to join us because we were singing a Catholic hymn. But at the same time, while singing the Catholic hymn, we knew that the message was passed across, and that they could not ban the hymn. At the same time, they could not stop us from singing it. Now, music, as one of the forms of art, has always been one of the ways of pushing back to power, one of the ways of communicating certain messages, especially in spaces where it is a bit unsafe to engage with those with power. And the seminary was that kind of space. But we have seen music used by different kinds of people. The Negro spirituals, this was one of the ways in which the slaves would express their feelings about the pain that they were going through, how they would give themselves hope, because music is as well therapeutic. In many of the anti-colonial struggles in Africa, I don't think you can name any particular one that was without song. They always had songs that they sang. Those from Zimbabwe who tell us about the Chimrenga music. Coming from Uganda, I remember the songs that were sung by the Museveni guerrillas in the 80s when we were still young. I've only seen one president in life. But that is, it's a story of stability in Uganda. So so I recall in childhood how we would sing along the songs of the rebels. One of them, Ambam 7, I think any Ugandan in the room would recall these songs. Of course, today they are irritating to hear. But it always gave us a certain kind of attachment with those that call themselves liberators. It always, it was an easy way of communicating to the people, an easy way of building solidarity, an easy way of mobilizing the community into accepting a particular message. We saw it used in the South African struggles. Many of us, at least in Uganda, we got to know and to be concerned about what was happening in South Africa through music, for instance, that of Chaka Chaka, Let Me Be Free, I Cry for Freedom. The songs would be disguised as though she was singing about an oppressive husband, but it would be clear that she was communicating to someone else. The songs of Miriam Makeba, songs of Pat Shange, We Miss You Manelo, because it was Manelo, but we would know that it's Mandela, not really Manelo. And even a child from a ghetto in Uganda would sing along that song, even if some did not really know what it was about. But you would start by being attracted to the music, and then you would ask, but what is this about? Recently, I was watching on YouTube a song by this song, Joanna Give Me Hope. Joanna Give Me Hope was such a hit in many places. Someone was saying that, oh, I had never listened to the lyrics of this song. I've always been dancing along. I didn't know that it was such a serious song. But everyone would immediately stand up when they heard Joanna Give Me Hope. The music of Lucky Dube, prisoner, slave, in whatever forms that they were disguised, the message was quite clear. I remember where I come from in southern Uganda. Deep in the village there, at a wedding, when the music of Lucky Dube played, you knew that it was going to be chaos at the wedding. You knew that there was going to be a rampage, people breaking tree branches and jumping while raising them, because the immediate message that they got was that this was music about freedom, music about peace. Musicians always found a way of negotiating territories that are unsafe, of communicating messages that would otherwise be difficult to communicate. And it has an effect of disarming the oppressors, disarming those that you're singing about. Sometimes before they know it, they have already joined into dancing to the song, or they do not want to seem odd by not being part of the merrymaking group. Now that is for music, but we have also seen it growing across other kinds of art. Satire of late has become a very important form of expression of dissent. Humor in different forms. We see young people circulating memes, or we see it in comedy, we see it in cartoons. Being a cartoonist, I know the advantages that come with using humor in resistance. One is that you easily mobilize support. So many people will come to laugh, but in the process of laughing, the message is communicated. we live in societies, at least in many African countries, where people are reluctant to read. We see these so many reports that are released. The other day when we were listening to statistics about democracy, freedom in Africa, many of us were asking, where are these reports? They're available online, but we are bombarded with so much information every day that we do not have time for reading all that. But within a cartoon, I'm able to summarize 1,000 words or almost a book. Even young people that do not want to read, they'll come to laugh. They'll come to a cartoon to laugh. And in the process, the message is communicated. With these cartoons, people have been able to lampoon, people have been able to ridicule oppressors, people have been able to demystify oppressors by pulling them down to be laughed at. In the process, they have equipped masses, they have equipped them with some sort of strength where they feared that this is a taboo topic. Then they would start talking. The cartoons direct debates, they direct discussions. Someone asked me, but why would you draw a cartoon of the president? Don't you have any fear drawing about it? Don't you fear being sued? And I told them that with cartoons, we have much more license than those who communicate with text. One, except if the president was arbitrary, if government was arbitrary in dealing with me, they cannot prove that I've drawn the president. If anyone claims that the cartoon I've drawn is of the president, the burden of proof is on them. It's not on me. But if it looks like them, I'll say maybe that's just mere coincidence. Yeah, well, I understand that in some contexts, some leaders have gotten around that by banning cartoons altogether. In Rwanda, I'm not quite sure, but I've heard that it's not allowed to draw cartoons of the president, ridicule the president in cartoons. Maybe our brother there will tell us that I've heard of such a law. But even if that happens, there will always be ways of going around. There will always be ways of creating other avenues of communication. And in this creativity that we see in art, young people do not give up. We have seen topics that have traditionally not been discussed anywhere, which today we have found various other avenues of talking about them. Now, recently, I would use a case as I come to the end of my speech. I spearheaded a protest, an online protest about service delivery in Uganda. We called them exhibitions, and they were mostly on Twitter and maybe even on Facebook. So in this protest, I just called upon people to take pictures. The first was, we called it the Kampala Pothole Exhibition. So I mobilized people to take photos and exhibit them online. Just take a photo of a pothole wherever you find it in Kampala and tweet it. The second phase within the exhibition was to satirize those pictures. And I was amazed by what young people did with the photos. There was one of the president in a boat sailing on a pothole, another of a Titanic on a pothole. There is a young man who assigned himself the role of taking the president around the city, but simply by photoshopping his picture into potholes. Wherever there would be a pothole, the president would be there standing, looking at the pothole, or standing in the pothole. Some people would think that these are just gestures to laugh about, and that's it. But in the process, you're making power uncomfortable. You're making them feel you don't want them to get away with oppressing you with so much ease. Within a short time, we got so many responses. We got responses from Kampala City Council officials, responses from Parliament. The president released some money to fix potholes. Of course, the part of the story that I will not tell is that the potholes were filled with soil. Yes, but as I end, of course, one of the challenges of using such methods is that some people will simply laugh about the cartoons. They'll just be entertained by the music. They laugh about the memes, and life goes on. Of course, this added to the other fact that today there is so much information that everything seems to be in a flux. There is always a fleeting wide array of information every day that the attention span is quite short. That if you do not struggle so much to remain active and visible, those who are on the other side will bombard the public with a lot of more information to distract them. So within that distraction, I think we have to devise means of ensuring that the message that we are sending across can persistently and consistently remain. I thank you so much.
Thank you. Once again for our three presenters, Dikeledi Mokoena, Inaim Eltiab, and Jimmy Spire Sentongo. Let's thank them again for the three fantastic presentations they've made. We have now earned our tea break, and we'll do so for the next 15 minutes. And when we come back, we will get into the masterclass on movement building. That will feature now Vitali, Arif Noor, Daniel Odinga, and Grace Gitao. For now, it's break tea for the next 15 minutes. Please be back in 15. Thank you.
I know you blues in blue, playing sweet child of mine, and I still feel that line. Where are you now? Where are you now? Hey, it's been too long ago, my love. Where did we go wrong? Too late to turn around. Where are you now? Where are you now? Hey, it's been too long. You're just like my favorite song going round and round my head. Like my favorite song going round and round my head.
Let's come back to the room, please.
I run the game, I'm feeling like referee. No, like Moses parting the Red Sea, like a chauffeur, me in the back of the Bentley. So I step out, all white, can't stain. What you want? Rosé, champagne? I got that. Big bag, back pain. Taking the piss, the only time I can't aim. So we toasted a good life, living every minute to the full, cause I could die. Pull up at the spot, open doors, and it's suicide. Chillin' rent free, where the check, please? Couple hundred G's on a good night.
Good morning, everybody. Please start moving back into the marquee. At 11 o'clock sharp, the next speakers will be speaking. If we can please all move back into the marquee. At 11 o'clock sharp, the next speakers will already be on platform speaking. So we have less than 5 minutes to all please settle down.
Eunice Musime, Godbat Mshave, Salma and Keita, Vanessa, my Lord the Bishop, gentlemen, Avi,
Good morning, everyone. As we are waiting for the room to fill up, we have an Angolan activist in the room who's been with us, who's going to come and perform for us a spoken word piece. Please put your hands together for Joycey as she comes up. Photographers, you are standing in the way of my presenter. Thank you so much.
Anthems for freedom. Peace was strolling like a phantom, and in the end, shined as a hero. Was sitting in his complaints on the first row seat, while the bullets bled the earth and only shot up after the diabolical murder of martyrs. As Marcelino says, peace is beautiful on the media. Peace is pale, peace is white. Peace doesn't sleep in our ghettos. It doesn't visit our table. It doesn't flow from our faces. It our dance in our stomachs. Peace wasn't there when my smile went silent and when my scream faded away. One makes war to reach peace, and then one makes more war for keeping it. Peace offered to us a portion of lies. Peace is the alpha and omega of war. Peace energizes that circuit of horrors. So, dear peace, I have two questions for you. Look at me and answer. I said, look at me and answer. Where were you when desesperated people look for a cure capable to give them survival in this space of cruel life? Where were you when thousands of staff were stuck into the saved women's vulvas who were left with agonizing souls? Why did you become infatuated with war and not with love? I don't want to know about synonyms, antonyms, or linguistics meaning. I want to know why peace pretended to care. Why does it act as an atomic nuclear energy, clean, without pollution, through extremely dangerous and fatal, that freezes a nation, leaves the poetry hoarse when its radioactivity decides to embrace the earth? Tell me, peace, do you want me, after all this, pay homage to you? Do you want me to undress the Bukowski's ironies, wet me Jean Tala's metaphors, harvest the flowers of Jantona Jacinto's poetry to pay homage to you? Of course no, please, call the love. While peace for many centuries had eyes to references among the major poets and Pepetela, while it only respected the masters of Bonanza, love came and revealed to us dignified references that long existed inside our ghettos. Today, we can be inspired by the poetry of Joyce Zhao. We are inspired by short of liberty that echoes in Laurinda Gouveia. Peace make us numbers and statistics. Love make us prose, verb that hyperbolizes godness. Peace values symbols. Love values the people and the earth. For that, I will be eternally for love and never, never for peace. Thank you.
Give a bigger round of applause than that. Surely. That reminded me of two quotes. One from a now old movie by Samuel L. Jackson, where he says, peace at any price is no peace at all. Peace at any price is no peace at all. But also a young activist named Irfan Mangera in South Africa, who reminds us that activism is an act of love. Activism is an act of love. And so I think that was a very, very important provocation. As we go into this afternoon, we'll be doing two sessions. Well, this morning still, into the afternoon. We'll be doing two sessions. Before lunch now, we'll be doing a session around movement building, and then we'll be talking about the communique. But this afternoon, we'll also be doing speed dating to network. And I'd like us to, in the spirit of what we started to talk about yesterday afternoon, really be focused on what action must be taken. we cannot leave this room without having a sense of individual, institutional, but also collective action that we can and should take. And so as we go into the session on movement building, it's a masterclass in movement building, I'm going to ask our presenters to come up. They've decided the way in which they want to do this. I'm quite excited to see what it's going to be. But let's give a round of applause for Nawavali Sitali, Arif Nur Ali Fazil, Daniel Odinga, and Grace Kitao. Please clap for them as they come up. A panel of young...
The true fighter. Let's take up. If I die in the battlefield, tell my mom I did my best. 'Cause I am a soldier. A soldier who's a true fighter. Let's jump, let's jump. If I die in the battlefield, oh, tell my mama I did my best. My mama I did my best. I am a soldier. A soldier who's a true fighter. Thank you so much. You can have a seat. So I want to introduce the team of young organizers who are seated in front of us. And like we said, I cannot speak for them. So for me, it will just be passing the mic. So to introduce myself first, my name is Daniel Odinga. I'm from Kenya. I work with ActionAid International at the global platform. And my key role is always to mentor and coach movements and ensure that young people's voices are heard everywhere in spaces of influence. So that's me. Let me pass my mic to my colleague.
Hello, everyone. My name is Grace Kitao. I'm from Kenya as well. I work with ActionAid International Kenya. I also support movements to create impact and the change that we want to see and shifting power to the people. Thank you.
Ahoy, my comrades, ahoy. Ahoy, my comrades, ahoy. Amandla. Yes, good morning, everyone. Back home, it should be still morning, I think. My name is Nawavali Sitali. I am with ActionAid. I'm also a co-founder of a social movement called Youth for Parliament that advances the participation of young people in politics. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Arif Nur Ali Fazil, Pan-African from Tanzania, home of Kilimanjaro, Serengeti, Ngorongoro, and Zanzibar, working with ActionAid Tanzania, coordinating youth programs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let's give him a round of applause. So in ActionAid, we define our social movement as, I know there have been very many issues on what social movements are. And we cannot say this is the final definition of a social movement. But then in order for us to work with social movement, we have to come to a standpoint on what do we really define social movement. And so in ActionAid, after so many deliberations, we came up with the definition of a social movement being purposefully organized groups and broad alliances of people who are connected through shared identity and are interested in striving to work towards a common goal. And this common goal is mostly towards political and social change. And one of the main objectives of social movements is always to shift unequal and unjust power. That's one of the key objectives of social movements. And in social movements, one key action is always organizing. And on organizing, we talk about organizing is leadership that enables people to turn the resources that they have into the power they need to make the choice, to make the change that they want. And this is a definition by one Marsh Gans, who was one of the key influencers in the topic of organizing. And we borrow so much from what Mark Gans does on organizing. And so we have a team here who are going to discuss about what they are doing and how can we build social movements in our different areas. Social movements work differently in different setups, in different structures. So this is just a key example on how social movements work in different setups. And we have people from Kenya, we have from Zambia, we have from Tanzania, and I think this is a broad spectrum of Africa represented in terms of how social movements work. So hoping this discussion, this masterclass, will give you an insight on how social movements work and how we can build social movements and how as allies we can work with social movements. So introducing my first, I have my few questions that we're going to go through. And the first question is more about why social movement? Like, why social movement? Why do you decide to work with social movement? And when talking about this, talking about how do social movements start? Like, how do we start social movements? And I'm going to give first chance to Grace to tell us why social movement and how do social movements start, and give examples from what she's already doing in the field.
All right. Thank you so much, Daniel, for the comprehensive introduction. I think for the whole of this session, we're going just to be chanting, right? Because you're building power. So back in Kenya, we say, Viva, comrades, viva. So you're supposed to say viva, okay? Have you understood? Yes. So viva, comrades, viva. When you say viva, you say viva, okay? Viva, comrades, viva.
Viva.
Viva, comrades, viva.
Viva.
Viva, comrades, viva.
Viva.
All right, so now when social movements are very dear to me, they're very personal to my heart because I believe they're the next catalytic change that we want to see in our communities. And when you ask yourself why to, it is a student-led Pan-African movement to end sexual harassment from staff on campus. Ideally, it builds on the successes of movements such as the Me Too and Sex for Grades to empower students to breaking the silence towards issues around sexual harassment through creative student-led activism. And we've seen a lot of great strides in this movement in that students are coming together. They have been silenced for a long period of time in not speaking. And one of the main things that the students did, they realized that there was a problem, in our universities. And I know this is not an issue just in Kenya, right? We understand that sexual harassment, it's global. It cuts across all our countries. So it's ensuring that these people are having the courage to speak. And when they began with a small group of people, just a group of 8 people who are just asking themselves, there's a lot of prevalence when it comes to sexual harassment in our institutions. So what then do we do? So they did a research and started a campaign that grew. And right now there are more than 1,000 students joining this movement in creating that change. And that's for me how I feel that social movement should be defined, giving power to the people. And it is very much continuous. It doesn't end. Yes.
Thank you. Maybe
compared to civil society organization, social movements take role in social change and social justice compared to civil society, considering the fact that the legal setting of our context limits civil society to operate and bring change fast and than social movements. So to our context, we have a movement called Activista, and this Activista movement, it's connecting young people all over the country, young people coming from civil society organization, opinion leaders, young people from schools, from streets, out of schools, all of them together join and form this movement called Activista movement. And they do work, they are locally rooted and globally connected, the movement that the Activista movement. And for example, Activista Pemba, so we have young people in Pemba Activista Pemba, they had an issue in Pemba, like in schools. They were, according to education policy, one toilet should be used by 20 students, but you might find a school with more than 100 or 200 students sharing only 3 toilets. So this was an issue for them, young people. So they organized and mobilized themselves, and they went to the government and they tabled their issue and they aired out their voices, and the government in the coming budget have allocated budget for construction of these toilets in those schools in Pemba. And this intervention that movements from Activista Pemba are doing are informed. They are backed up with data, with information, with research that ActionAid is supporting them to conduct these researches, to have information, to have data that helps them in doing these movements that aims at bringing social change in their societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Arif. And we understand that one key challenge in social movements is on leadership. And like for discussions, the previous discussion is mostly like most social movements are based in the urban centers. But then maybe now you can tell us about how through your work you build the grassroots leadership in the movement, and just give us an example on what you do with People for Parliament.
Yes, so the social movement that I co-founded before I joined ActionAid is a social movement called Youth for Parliament. So in 2016, I attempted to run for office, but I was not adopted. I didn't lose. Let me just say that, because everyone is smiling and saying, but you're here. I didn't lose. I was not adopted because I was too young. I wanted to run in an area called Mwembeshi. I was not adopted. So me and a friend, who was not a friend at the time, we said that the systematic exclusion of young people is deliberate. And as long as we don't realize that there are concerted efforts at keeping young people away from leadership, we're not going to achieve anything. So we decided to talk about ideating a structure that will push for change and that will push to get young people into spaces of leadership. At the time, we did not even know what a social movement is, which is one of the key principles around movements. Movements are not built from a point of someone telling them that you are a social movement. In my experience, I believe as Africans in our communities, in the areas we come from, we're already self-organized. And people just don't know that what they are could amount to what a social movement is. And so we did not know that we were forming what would be called a social movement. We started talking about getting other young people that were interested in politics to join us. And then we started mobilizing a movement. In 2016, in 2018, we officially launched it. We still didn't know that it was called a movement. In 2017, we had managed to mobilize around 3,000 people to join the movement. And still at the time, we didn't know it was a movement. Until later in 2017, we came across ActionAid, and then they told us that what you guys have is what would be called a movement. And we changed our approach from mobilizing to begin to engage in organizing as a means of distributing leadership. And from 2018 to 2021, our numbers grew from 3,000 young people to 60,000 active grassroots organizers of the movement. We didn't have a list of membership. We just had organizers, people that were going on the ground, and it was distributed leadership. And there are principles that we worked with, and one of the key principles that we worked with, the defining principle of the movement that I come from, that I don't lead anymore, by the way, was that the first principle was that we did not handle money. We put that as a culture of the movement, that we don't handle money. We don't apply for grants. There is no organization today that would claim that Youth for Parliament applied for a grant from them. We never applied for grants because we knew that money has a tendency of drawing you away from the goal that you're trying to achieve, because you begin to focus on the money and not the goal that you're trying to get to. So our ways of mobilizing ourselves were that you don't have to travel from one region to another in order for you to spread the message. We used a principle that is otherwise known as Linyongandambo, which means shake your neighbor. The idea was that if your next door neighbor does not know what you are doing, then you are not doing anything. So you cannot live in a community where in your house you are progressive, you are feminist, in the next door there's a patriarchal man, and then you are saying you are doing work out there. It can't work like that. So we said the only way that we're going to mobilize unlimited resources is for us to talk to people who are next to us about the issues that we're facing. So you talk to your neighbor. You don't have to go outside your community. And in that method of mobilizing and organizing, we got to 60,000 members. When we went for the 2021 general elections, Youth for Parliament managed to support from its membership over 500 young people that ran for office. And we managed to win 8 seats in the National Assembly. 8 out of the 9 young people elected in the National Assembly in Zambia are members of Youth for Parliament. And they are not just members of Youth for Parliament from people that were already running for office. They are people who were within the rank and file of the movement that got trained within the movement to be able to run for office. And then now, even when we want to get an issue on the table of the National Assembly, it's a matter of just texting one of the members of the movement and telling them, when this issue comes up to Parliament, please raise it up. Talk about it in Parliament. We are amending the National Youth Development Act in Zambia because of the young people that were elected from the movement. We also got 5 young people who were elected as mayors who are part of the movement, and 150 young people who were elected as councillors in the different constituencies and wards. And these young people are not accountable to their political party structures. They are accountable to the movement in the area where they come from. So as a leader of the movement, I don't have power to go and tell a young person in a ward to say you're supposed to do this. The young people in that area that are part of the movement structure are the ones that control, because we built a structure that has got distributed leadership. And that, for me, is the key ingredient that determines if a movement is going to work or not. It should be distributed leadership. Everyone in the movement must have a sense of belonging, but also they must have responsibility to make decisions at a local level. It must not center around one individual. And that's the approach that we take with movement building. But also, in our principle of shared leadership, we took the approach that leadership must transfer from one era to another. I only served as movement manager for Youth for Parliament for 2 years, because we have got only a 2-year term of office. And if you cross the age of 30, you can't serve as a leader of Youth for Parliament. So when my 2 years was done, someone else came in and served, and their 2 years was done, and there's now a young lady that is running and serving the movement. The idea also is that so that we don't keep having the same faces leading the movement, we also don't have a situation where you monopolize the institution to become something that belongs to individuals. So when you serve in the leadership, when your term of office is done, you leave, and you don't just leave your movement leadership, you leave the entire structure of leadership at that level, and you go and join a branch. Because we believe that leadership must come from the bottom, and the top must just be able to stay and give direction. That's the principle of movement building that we use, even as Action Aid, that we have adopted now in organizing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nana. And you have talked so much about moving from mobilizing to organizing, and it seems like these two are really different aspects, organizing and mobilizing, very, very different. And maybe, Grace, you can tell us more about how it's really, really important for social movement to build relationships. So how do social movements build relationship within themselves?
All right, great. Is it on? Yeah. Okay. So how, first of all, just to respond to what Daniel has asked about organizing and mobilizing, I'll give a very good analogy that Nawa gave us yesterday of, for example, when you're building a house, right? You'll need the materials. So, for example, you'll need maybe nails, you'll need the timber, you'll need bricks, you'll need to see how the roofing will look like. And now, once now you have all these materials in place, you now need to build the whole structure. And for mobilizing is those nails that you need to make the whole house. Because for that house to be built, to become a structure, it has to be in an organized manner. And for mobilizing, it's, for example, where people will sign a petition, you know, a specific time. So you bring people together at a specific time to do an action. And for organizing, it's continuous building people power. It's continuous and it's long-term. So it means that you have to create long-term strategies with your people. And in my experience, for example, in Campus Me Too, how we've managed to also organize and even how we started. For Campus Me Too, we started in 2019, where I said that it was a small group of students that really saw that there's a really huge need for them to change and create impact. And they went, did a research to find out what is the issue in numbers. Because you see, then again, we can't start having campaigns, yet we are not really interrogating what is that issue in numbers. So when they went and found out, they found out that 49% of female students experience sexual harassment from a university staff member in Kenya, and 24% of male students. And out of this, 66% of the student survivor have experienced sexual harassment from either a lecturer or a professor. And at that time in 2019, when the movement was launched, we only had one student who was bold to speak publicly, meaning that why then do we have that gap? Because even when we asked in the research, we found that a lot of students only tell their friends when they've experienced sexual harassment. And even when you look at family members, the institution, not so many report, because there's that fear of stigmatization, fear of victimization. They don't know if they report, if it will be kept confidential and all that. So in 2019, when they launched the movement, they were able to bring together a group of people with like-minded ideas that really were working in the space of SGBV, to ensure that we are bringing and creating more allies and networks and linkages, bringing them together. So they mobilized over 500 students and different multi-stakeholders who came to say no to sexual harassment from staff on campus. And it hasn't been an easy journey. Mobilizing and organizing is not an easy journey because you need the people. That's what I said when I began. You need people to work with you. As much as there is an issue, you need the people. So along the way now in 2020, after they launched this movement, we found a lot of interest with students. So then it meant they had to build their relationship. How then? So they found out ways of having family groups. So what they have within their institutions, because we started with only 3 universities in 2019, and right now we have over 20 universities who have created their own chapters in ensuring that there is Campus Me Too within their institution. So they have their own family groups, and they use a structure where they have pillars. Because also for movements, when building a relationship, I need to be interested, what am I coming to do in that movement? So they have different pillars. They have the communication pillar, and for this pillar is just ideally people who are good in comms work, social media work. The wellness pillar, of course, because we understand the issue around sexual harassment requires a lot of psychosocial support. They have also the activism pillar, the use of art to ensure that we are advocating our issue and we are speaking it in a form of art. And of course now the advocacy pillar, where it has a lot of people now. And that's where they join, and in different universities have different student ambassadors.
And the previous discussions, there have been so much discussion on protest and social movements, and what's the difference between protest and social movement. Maybe I'll take it back to Nawa and tell us about what are some of the creative ways that social movements use in order to ensure that they can shift this power.
You raise a very good point, and I think it was a theme of discussion on the first day when we were trying to understand what would be the difference between a social movement and a protest. In most instances, when you mention the word social movement, the first thing that pops in your head is that a social movement is a protest, or it's about protesting. A protest is a tactic that social movements use to achieve a goal. It is not the only way that you get to achieve results. From the time that Youth for Parliament was formed, they never did any protest. They've never been engaged in any protest as a form of direct action. They've engaged in different forms of direct actions, and they're not protests. And were still able to achieve the results that they did. It's a very thin line to say that, not a very thin line, it's a very common misconception to think that movements can only achieve results when there are protests. In times more than often, movements that, I'm a protest activist myself. I'm always found at a protest. I've been arrested several times because of protests. But I have a belief or an understanding from my experience that protests can only achieve so much results as one strategy. You need other strategies to build on for you to be able to achieve results. I'll give an example of a story that I've heard. I don't know how factual this story is. If there are any history researchers, please, if it's not factual, tell me that it's not factual. But there's a story where they say that there was a meeting that Dr. King and, what's this guy's name? Protests, American. Malcolm X. Were invited to a meeting. And then Malcolm X asked Dr. King to stay back so that he could enter the meeting first. And when Malcolm X entered the meeting, he spent about 10 minutes in that meeting and walked out. And then told Dr. King, now they are ready for you. They are ready to listen. And when Dr. King went in there, he managed to achieve results. Protests bring governments and institutions to the table, but they don't bring the reform that you want. But there are also instances when protests don't work. There are contexts where you cannot protest. The mere idea of just wanting to engage in a protest will land you in jail and you will not be able to achieve your results. There are different strategies that you can employ as a movement. You can engage in strategic interest litigation as a strategy. It's also a tactic that you can use. So, and then the other difference again is that there are protests that exist that are leaderless. The difference between a protest and a movement is that a protest has got a leader, a defined strategy, a defined goal. There's something that you're trying to achieve, sustained results. A protest will usually just have one target that you're trying to achieve. I'm not going to apologize for this. End SARS, for example, right? End SARS, in my view, was not a movement. It was a protest. It was a protest to end something, right? Not Too Young to Run was a movement. There was a clear target. There was a clear goal. There was sustained action. And the protest was one of the strategies that was being used to achieve the result. So it's very important for us in the civil society sector to begin to understand that we need to open up ourselves to work with movements, because movements are not just about protests. Movements are about results. And protests are strategies that sometimes they can use to achieve those results. But it doesn't define what a movement is. It's not limited to just being a protest. Thank you.
Thank you so much now. So, in view of the time limits, we say in Nairobi, masaa machache. Mambo mengi lakini masaa machache. There's too much to discuss, but the time is limited. But then I want to give to my comrade Arif, and just build up on that. And also, we have different infrastructure that are available for movements that movement can work through. And ActionAid has created some of these structures, and where movement can, where NGOs or other form of civil organizations can come in and see how can they work with movements.
Negotiate when? Do you get the question?
Yep.
All right. Okay, just to give a background. The reason I ask this is, as a student of social movements, you see things like the NSAS that you referenced grapple with whether social movements should engage the state and negotiate for issues they advance. And so there's a school of thought that social movement, because they engage in confrontational politics, they shouldn't negotiate with the state. So should movements negotiate with the state? And if you have classic examples, wait as well, please feel free to share. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
I'm very curious on that story where you say that you did not know that this was a social movement till someone came and told you that this was a social movement. Which brings me to my first suggestion, that this idea of social movement, is it Western driven, or what is it that we are saying is, I know I'm being laughed at, but civilian led movements?
Thank you. Maybe you can start with those three and then you can pick others. And now I think you have 2 questions. Maybe you can start with those. And then maybe Grace, you can give examples from what you have done with Campus Me Too on negotiations and how it works.
Yes. Okay. Very interesting questions. So the first question on resource mobilization. One of the reasons why we disengaged from applying for grants was because we did not want to change the work that we were doing to suit the grants that were available. And so, for example, we need 100 T-shirts, we need 20 caps, we need this and this and that. And our approach was that if someone tells that they have unspent funds that they would like to spend on us, we give them that list and tell them, don't give us the money, give us these things. And that's how we took the approach. But also, at a time when resources were coming in, we engaged. We don't want funds to be an issue that takes time for us to negotiate and decide. But also, we are working on this thing out of pure passion. The moment we begin to work on this thing from a salary point of view, it's going to be about meeting my targets as an employee and not about the goal. So you as Action Aid handle the funds. These are the things we need. When the donors say they have money, they want to give us money, we'll be telling them, go and talk to this guy, and this guy will show you what we need. You discuss everything else. Us, what we want is the materials that we have asked for. And that's the approach that we took towards resource mobilization. It was focused on, there was no single person within the structure of the movement that was focused on going to go and mobilize resources. We already had a list of the things that we wanted for us to achieve what we wanted to do. And anyone who came with an offer, we told them, these are the things that we want, and this is what we're trying to achieve. And it did work. It was very difficult in the starting point. When we started, we had, the first leadership had 20 people. And when we put that principle on the table, the numbers reduced from 20 to 5. And then the numbers increased again, but they reduced again. It took a bit of time for people to understand that this is what we're trying to get to. But also remember, when we were starting Youth for Parliament, which would also draw me to the question, the next question, we were not young people that were already engaged with civil society. We were just young people that were coming from different spaces of politics, from their communities, that wanted to see change. And we began engaging in that process. Most young people that have been engaged with civil society organizations have already been sold the concept of transport refund, honorarium, and so on and so forth. And there's always a question when you invite them for a program, share the logistic note. And just as a side note, when a person asks you to share the logistic note, they are not asking for you to share the agenda. They're asking for you to share what are the resources that are there for them. So these are not the young people that we're working with. We were working with young people that we were from communities. We didn't even know that this thing of transport refund existed. What we wanted to do was to get to a certain result. And that's what we wanted to achieve. And we tried by all possible means to keep it as organic as possible. And that's why even serving in the leadership of Youth for Parliament is 2 years. Because we know that after 2 years, when you begin getting exposed to such spaces, automatically you begin to fall in that trap. So you have to move on so that others can come in that are not yet polluted, if I can use that word. the concept of social movements, just like the concept of democracy, is not a Western concept. And my argument is the definition is what would make it Western, but the practice is already things that we are doing. We are still doing the same things that we were doing as Youth for Parliament when we were forming, before we knew we were a social movement. A person just came and told us that what you are doing is called a social movement. It didn't change what we were doing. We still kept on doing with what we were doing. So no one influenced what we were. We are still Youth for Parliament. We still mobilize the way that we mobilize, except that now when someone asks us, what are you? People that are educated told us we are now a movement. It is the same approach that I feel democracy is. The way of governing ourselves, at least from where I come from, is that we in our village govern ourselves. People that are educated are the ones that said, oh, what you are doing is known as democracy, but you are already doing it. So the definition of what we are doing does not drive what we are trying to do. It is just putting a name to what we did not know that's what it's called. So it's not a Western concept, it's a local concept.
Thank you so much, Nawa. Grace?
All right, I'll pick on the question on negotiation. First and foremost, in practice of what we've been doing, when Campus Me Too started, it started at the student level, and then the institutional level to the national level. And of course, when they developed the petition in form of demands and collected the signatures, they did negotiate and mapped allies, because then again, if there are no negotiation, people will not understand your issue, because you need to put your issue to the table. So they mapped, first of all, allies that they can negotiate. They can go put their issue, and they can go tell the story that they want to create change in. So, and that's when now we found there was a lot of meetings planned to ensure that, again, we are building the relationships to the people that we want to work with. Because the network that we have right now, or even for Campus Me Too movement, it is a multi-stakeholder approach, meaning that it is not just the student leading. There are a lot of allies that we need to negotiate, to come to the table, to talk about the issue, to find strategies, and see now how then can we create impact. Because at times, for example, when they began, they wanted the Ministry of Education to give a directive, but the ministry will not have known that if they did not go to voice out what exactly was needed. And you talked about confrontation. At times, and we say that the contexts differ. For them, negotiation and dialogue worked for them in terms of what they were doing, because they needed allies for them, because of course they are the ones doing the activities, but the implementers or the people who are going to make these different changes and reforms, and especially when it comes to policies, are the policy makers. So they needed to negotiate, come together, put their issue or matter or engage now with the people that they want to call as allies, and of course now know how then can we create impact together in terms of what now we call organizing, continuous process. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Masaa machache, mambo mengi. Can we have two only and then we conclude?
Thank
two
you.
burning ones, then you conclude.
Amos Muyambo. Thank you for insightful presentation. Mine is directed to any one of you presenters. Since social movements are very powerful tools of transformation and change, I wanted to ask what are your experience in view of the destabilization and the threat of infiltration by dominant hegemonic structures that feel threatened by your movements? We have seen that when social movements take the strategy like protesting, there is always infiltration where the dominant structures planned people who might violate and break, burn buildings to destabilize your vision and goals. So how can we, with your experience, deal with infiltration and destabilization processes by hegemonic structures who are feel threatened? Thank you.
Thank you so much. The last question of the session.
All right, thank you. My name is Karen Manzera from Zimbabwe, and I wanted to say in Zimbabwe, the youth movement seemed to be a bit segmented. So we have like just youth organizations and groups of young people doing a lot of activism work, and they're doing really great work. But we lack, our movement is that much segmented compared to maybe the women's movement and all these different movements that we've seen. And as a result, we rarely see results in terms of the advocacy work that these organizations are doing, because basically there's a lot of segmentation. Sometimes they're advocating for the same issues, but failing to come together as the youth movement. So what advice would you maybe give us, or what is it that is lacking that we can maybe try to improve as young people in Zimbabwe to try and consolidate the youth movement and avoiding just having different groups of young people dealing on different or the same issues? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe I can start with the last question, and then my colleague Nawa and Phil and Arif will take over the last one. For me, the big advice I can give you right now is that most movements cannot work without coaching and mentorship, and I prefer you start by looking at maybe finding coaches and mentors on the same. I know you are seated next to Mtemi, and he's a good coach on social movements, and also are sitting next to Rotimi, very good coach. But also in Zimbabwe, we have ActionAid and a global platform who offer really good mentorship and coaching sessions, especially for movement leaders, and I feel that can be really good help for you and for any other person who would like to assist other movements, because we have really good program on building movement leaders, grassroots movement leaders. And then maybe now I can take over the first.
So the conversation around infiltration is actually very real for social movements. I'll give examples of how we were infiltrated as a movement. And then I'll talk about some of the strategies that we use to counter that. So the current, let me not start with the current government because it's still rosy. Let me go to the old one, and then I'll come to the current one. But I'll try to be careful so that I can still land back home. The previous government, at a time when we had mobilized around, when we were still at 20,000 active organizers, they approached us and offered us a listening ear. They said that you need to come to the party secretariat and then negotiate and see how we can take your issues into account and maybe adopt some young people. And then we responded and said, okay, we're going to send some people to come and negotiate. And then the negotiations moved from the party secretariat to State House. So when the colleagues went to negotiate, when they left the State House, one of them was an ambassador. And the other one came back and said, no, we negotiated. They've agreed to listen to us, and we're going to do these things. But then eventually you would see that when you have meetings, this guy would begin to talk about things that we did not agree on. When they go on TV, on radio, they'd be talking about things that we didn't agree on. And we knew that there must have been a promise that was made to say, since we have deployed this one, you are going to be the next one, as long as you do this and that. The second form of infiltration, the current, and my colleagues from Zambia are looking at me and saying, do you want to go there? I'm going to go there. The current deputy ambassador to Tanzania, the current from Zambia, comrade of ours, who was the former spokesperson of the president, the current president, was a colleague that we deployed to go for a meeting at the party secretariat to go and negotiate with the ruling party about adopting young people to run for office. And when he got there, yes, he's the one that went and got adopted. He left that meeting as the presidential spokesperson and was serving as the presidential spokesperson until recently, earlier this year, when he was redeployed to the deputy ambassador of to Tanzania. Still serving now. I'm hoping I can see him before I leave. But it states will stop at nothing to infiltrate. And sometimes quoting from a Christian, something that I learned when I was young, my Christian days. My mother would be very upset now with me saying in my Christian days, but something that I learned when I was young. There's a verse that says something about deceiving even the very elect to an extent of, I don't know, but yeah. So it's the guy that is serving as deputy ambassador was someone that was with us at our inception stage. So it's not someone that came in at the later stage. So infiltration is not just about people that come from outside. It is people that you started with that sell out. And the most logical way that we dealt with infiltration is that we engaged in organizing. By organizing, it means we already planned who were our allies. What did they think about us? What did we think about them? What was our message? What were we trying to achieve? What was our culture as a movement? When someone hears Youth for Parliament, they knew what we stood for, even before we spoke about what we stood for. That was the culture that we had. And so if anyone goes and says something else or does something else that does not reflect the culture of Youth for Parliament, people would be able to identify and say this is an imposter without pointing them out that they are an imposter. So we had a strong culture that was built as a movement. We had an identity that was built as a movement. Even before we get in the room, people would know about our identity. They would know about what we stand for. They would know about our culture. And if anyone tried to distort, it would be very easy for you to say, this is not Youth for Parliament. This is something else. That's how we dealt with infiltration. But I want to make a disclaimer. The story of Youth for Parliament is context specific. By sharing the story, I am not saying that you must replicate what Youth for Parliament does in exactness in your area or in your country or in your community. It is context specific, and movements are context specific. It is just an example to show that social movements work. Because colleagues, now as we are speaking, we have got young people in Parliament. We have got young people. The youngest and the first youth female parliamentarian in 15 years in Zambia is a product of Youth for Parliament. So we are just sharing these stories to say movements work. They achieve results. And they are not the same everywhere. What might work in Uganda might not work in, I wanted to say Zimbabwe, but those are like two extremes. What might work in Uganda might not work in, not Rwanda, might not work in
South
Tanzania?
Africa.
No.
Because it's South Africa.
What worked in Uganda might not work in South Africa. You have to understand that. The strategies, the tactics are simply there for you to be able to adapt them to suit the context where you are working from. I've spoken too much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And maybe I'll take that as your punching shot and send it to Arif for punching shot for like 30 seconds. Arif?
Just to wrap up, responding to my brother's question, I want to borrow a quote from Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, who once said, "It is only through unity that we shall find our strength." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arif. Grace?
for me, what I'd say is, if you don't do things right from the beginning, you end up with challenges. So then it means that we have to understand the foundation of what movements are, so that even when we are saying that we are having movements, we are saying that we are mobilizing people, we are organizing people, we really understand what we are really talking about. Because movements are working and they're catalytic agents of change. So we can first better understand what really the foundations are and also now continuously build people power. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for me, maybe our last quote is movement building or organizing is a crucial disturbance to an unjust power. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the platform.
Thank you so much for a great panel. In the spirit of keeping the social movement activists alive as you go down, a few months ago we were visited in South Africa by a group of activists from the US. And they taught us the following chant. So as they said, follow after me. It's our time. It's our turn. If we do nothing, it's our fault. It's our time. It's our turn. If we do nothing, it's our fault. It is our time. It's our turn. If we do nothing, it is our fault. All right. So we are now wrapping up towards the last formal session of the day. This afternoon, speed dating will be a little less formal. And so I'm going to ask Nicodemus to come up and just share with us the final outcome of our deliberations yesterday afternoon for the communique. As he makes his way up, as we've been saying, action, 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 action. The activists have reminded us that change is possible. And I think yesterday, one of the questions that came up was, do we really think we can see change that we want to see, of changing different kinds of democratic structures and process and not having elections or all of those things? Do we really think it's possible? But I was reminded of a statement that says, sometimes you're going to have to plant the seeds that will give shade from trees that you will not ever feel that shade of. Sometimes we're planting seeds today for trees that will grow and give shades to generations after us. And it's important still to plant the seed. So, Nicodemus, you'll take us into the communique and our last part of the formal proceedings.
So good afternoon, everyone. That we should avoid belaboring the definition of democracy. And the key contribution here was by Dr. Abba Danladi, who actually said that it is institutions and not definitions that will define Africa's democracy. And we all agreed that was actually very profound. In terms of the deliberations of yesterday, of course, the key issue was the conceptual and epistemological understandings of democracy. That was the key highlight of yesterday's proceedings. Yesterday's proceedings began with, of course, the presentation from Freedom House, Tiseke Kasambala, who presented key findings on the previous year's data, where she noted that the most serious setbacks of freedoms and democracy was a result of coups, war, and of course an attack on institutions of democracy by liberal incumbents. One of the learning lessons from the Freedom House findings was that elections remain a crucial cornerstone to democracy. And of course, this is what most of African countries, through the data, attested to that. Of course, the other session was on the role of public intellectuals in the academic market. And of course, the moderator, Godba Tumushabe, really challenged us, all right, to understand or to interrogate the decline of intellectualism in the African university. And of course, this was further buttressed by the presentations by both Kathleen and Kululwe, who who argued that there was a need to bridge the gap between academic intellectuals and organic intellectuals. Of course, this will really help in promoting democracy, and this was also supported by our colleague Njerika Beberi from Kenya. And here are some of the key highlights from the role of African diaspora in democratization. So one of the key issues that came out was diaspora is not an homogeneous entity. And of course, there was the need to challenge the involvement of African diaspora in Africa's democratization process. And crucially, was to also recognize that diaspora conference held here at MS Training Center for Development and Cooperation in Arusha between 19th to 21st July 2023. And I begin. The second edition of the Africa's Drive for Democracy brought together a diversity of African democratic community, including scholars, religious leaders, NGOs, donors, students, union, professionals, and all that. So this particular paragraph introduces to us, the essence, the reason why we're all here. Again, this is largely drawn from the conference agenda. I will point to you because the Elders Retreat also made a number of commitments, which I think will be important for us to really tie these commitments in this conference. So after a series of deliberations and reflections regarding the topical areas, the Elders Retreat resolved 7 key issues, and I'll read them to you. The first is to rekindle the flame of Pan-African thought, leadership, and practice to guide homegrown solutions-oriented approaches to historical injustices and present-day challenges such as exclusionary political economic practices that keep major sections of the population, such as women and the young people, on the periphery of public affairs. The second commitment was to amplify the triple nexus of democracy, economic growth, development, and peace. It was actually thought that these 3 issues are key ingredients towards democracy because, as they say, economic growth, democracy has been seen not to deliver economic growth. So this is something that has been a challenge, and the elders also noted this. Thirdly, was also on the issues to invest in African civic engagement and to build transformative leadership by encouraging wider political participations as a guarantor for democratization. The idea was to place the African citizen at the heart of democratization, what they say the agency of the African. Fourthly was to prioritize and support data-driven advocacy and evidence-based decision-making as an anchor for individual, institution, and collective interventions. Fifth was to monitor and track governance trends to inform early warning mechanisms so as to enhance quick responses to address issues that we have mentioned, issues such as state capture of public institutions, unconstitutionalism, what people call third term, militarism, illicit financial flows, corruptions, among others. The sixth commitment was to leverage on the tools of governance and creating economic opportunities to deliver key ingredients such as gender justice, participatory in public services. This is all that we have been discussing about social movements, particularly amongst the youth population. And the last was to link like-minded actors, just like we are all here gathered, both within public and private, towards the attainment of a safe, peaceful, prosperous and integrated Africa. And again, because this elders retreat was preceded by an opening welcome note by the President of the United Republic of Tanzania, Her Excellency President Samia, who actually gave her government's commitment towards having this. So she pledged her government's support for this important initiative. All right, so this was actually an endorsement. So with that, the elders endorsed two key issues. One is the proposition that Africa Drive for Democracy initiative and this conference become an annual event and an all-year-round program to be hosted here in Arusha. And the second was to undertake an operationalization, to develop an operationalization and monitoring mechanism to deliver, track, and evaluate these ambitions. The statement then proceeds to just give a highlight of this year's conference, including, the keynote that we all benefited, especially the centrality of the African youth in African democratization, and of course, the other important deliberations that came out from the former heads of state, including President Jakaya Kikwete, Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn, and of course, the chair of this Africa Drive for Democracy initiative, His Excellency Ernest Bai Koroma. So, in this statement, I say that we have principally agreed that there is nothing wrong with the definition and the conceptual understanding of democracy, but it is the practice that fails the continent. Another issue that we think I've proposed in this draft statement is that these social movements are context-specific and they need to be localized with the uniqueness that each country could be having in terms of the democratization agenda, especially in the social movements. Again, it is against this backdrop, of course there's other flesh that comes in the statement, we therefore now make the following resolutions. So I call upon, now it's an open session for us to make these resolutions. Maybe for the benefit of guidance, we made the following resolutions in the last conference. The first was to renew a commitment towards the fight against authoritarianism and the decline in Africa, of democracy in Africa. The second was to recommit a collaboration of solidarity towards the struggle for renewed and increased democratization. Third was to commit to claiming and occupying institutions of democracy. Right? That is very profound for the, especially for us who are fighting institutions that are now becoming very authoritarian. And lastly was to recognize, and this is to our colleague from South Sudan, right, to celebrate those who have led the struggle, right, within and beyond their borders. Those were the 4 commitments that we made last year, and I call upon now us to, to give proposals for this year's resolution in light of what I've just mentioned.
I don't know if we can adopt some of the resolution adopted because they continue to speak to the vision of the conference. I just wanted to add, I don't know how the floor can also help. Looking at African methodologies and researches and creating spaces for engagement in view of findings to make effective transformation to meaningful democracies.
The rapporteurs have captured that. I request that you say it again. The point on research methodologies.
If you can, I can just give a little background. If you heard the flow in their discussion that issues are contextual and relevancy is important. So I'm saying that researches, African methodologies that are relevant to be implemented in the policies or strategies for implementation in our endeavor to democracy, so that our democracy become relevant. We own it in an African context.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I would kindly solicit for support on the recommendations that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights should use some comfortable terms, which also caters for us. Otherwise, we have to also have a declaration of African rights, which will make us understand what we are really doing under African context. For example, I'm really against the point of calling another party an opposition party, because it really creates unnecessary aggression against the two people. Because if we start talking of opposition, I've seen it in Zimbabwe. The opposition supporters, they are really in danger because they are kicked left, right, and center, and they don't know where to report, because the moment you get in, it's like being stigmatized. I remember the time I was an educator in Zim, there came a moment when they stigmatized me with a certain party, which they called opposition. And so I was opposed to everything, every system, and therefore I was isolated. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Maybe, Doctor, before you sit, there are instruments like the African Charter for Democracy, Elections and Governance, there's the African Convention on Human and People's Rights. For the benefit of the rapporteurs, if we referenced those, would that take care of your...
Exactly those ones which are around us, let them be modified, because they are meant for us and they are useful to us. They are not useful anywhere else. So according to one of the authors, he said, art for art's sake is just another piece of deodorized dog shit. So if that one is not catering for us, it will be just another piece of something else which we don't know, because we need to resolve problems here. If we are in problems, we need to understand. Sorry, unfortunately, I couldn't quote the scholar, but it's there. It's in the written. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Wally. So it's been a brilliant meeting here, and I think this is the second one, and this is the first time attending. I've listened to the preponderance of a conversation around localizing, contextualizing the idea of democracy in African context. So, and then looking at the array of people that have been brought together from academia to people in practice, I want to recommend that this can serve as a platform going forward for launching and propelling a journey of democracy that brings these people from praxis and the academia together. It can be an annual publication, but it's going to be attracting African scholars and even those in the diaspora who can continue to advance this idea. Thank you.
I want to remind us that yesterday there was a proposition around a network, and maybe we should just put that as a formal resolution. And there was also a proposal around a Africa-centered barometer of democracy. So perhaps we want to just capture those as part of our resolution. So I'll do one and then...
Tessa, I have the mic. Yeah. Thank you. Samson, so two proposals. The first, following the conversation, is that we resolve to continue to support social movements, civil society, to hold governments to account to their commitments to democratic values and principles. And that's the first. The second proposition is, whilst we talk about contextualization, I think it's important, and I heard that proposition from the first conference, that we strengthen solidarity between movements or between academics and civil society, including transformative leaders in the public space. Because this triangle is central to actualizing, be it renegotiating the social contract or even upholding democratic values. Thank you.
Vanessa from Eritrea. I wanted to make a suggestion. I don't know how this should be phrased. Kind of going back off what Samson was saying, around more formal connection makings between individuals and organizations. So a lot of people here have such wealth of experience and have dealt with problems that some other people are trying to deal with right now. And I think informally, there's been so many incredible conversations. So maybe if there were smaller spaces like this, it's a bit difficult here to like stand up and ask questions for some, and it's not very conducive because it's mostly Q&As with the panelists. So if there could be smaller spaces such as, I don't know, half a day of workshops or I know there's going to be a networking thing in the evening or in the afternoon, but something more efficient in kind of sharing knowledge, sharing experiences, and building stronger connections between movements and individuals. Thank you.
Merci. Je voudrais, en complément, nous inviter en fait à nous engager davantage à contribuer au fonctionnement et à l'efficacité des mécanismes de renforcement de la démocratie au niveau régional que nos gouvernants ont mis en place. Merci.
Thank you. So in terms of accountability and being intentional to take this forward, I don't know if this is a question, but I would feel it is important that we strengthen our accountability mechanisms of our good thoughts from here. Because I know mostly you would find this is more of civil society voicing. And how does it link to, the interstate agencies and structures to ensure that these are implemented by the respective governments? So I don't know if in our communique we can really put a rejoinder for us to ensure that there is that interlinkage between the thoughts and the states, so that there is that intergovernmental or interparliamentary kind of accountability to these good thoughts that we have developed here. Otherwise, it will be really quite, I will not say a waste of time, but it will, it will not speak so well if this ends with us. May the governments, may the state agencies or parliaments have a discussion of this communique so that it goes forward and we are seeing tangible outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you go, the rapporteuring team didn't hear you clearly, so please.
Je suggérerais qu'on s'engage davantage à nous approprier d'abord les instruments au niveau régional qui structurent la démocratie et aussi à contribuer auprès de nos gouvernants au niveau régional au fonctionnement des mécanismes de promotion, c'est-à-dire de la démocratie. Nous ne donnons pas l'impression de vouloir remettre en cause les acquis instrumentaires, les mécanismes que nous avons. Juste une parenthèse, le Mali aujourd'hui affirme son détermination, mais en respectant les règles au sein des Nations Unies. Des décisions fortes sont prises pour le compte du Mali, mais en respectant les règles. Ne mettons pas en cause des règles qui existent, mais travaillons en fait avec ces règles, jouons avec ces règles pour nous affirmer et renforcer la démocratie. Merci.
Merci pour ce parfait résumé. En guise de recommandation, j'aimerais avancer l'argument du retour aux valeurs traditionnelles africaines, notamment en ce qui concerne le futur des femmes. Parce que dans nos sociétés africaines anciennes, les femmes avaient et les femmes ont encore un pouvoir certain. Dans nos sociétés traditionnelles, je dirais que la démocratie existe. Et dans les sociétés secrètes, on voit bien qu'il y a des femmes qui participent à la démocratie. Si on revient par exemple à la démocratie, à l'égyptienne, je le dirais ainsi, on a par exemple la reine Cléopâtre qui a régné sur son territoire. En Angola, on a la reine Zinga qui a combattu pour les indépendances en Angola. Donc je crois que pour que la place de la femme soit effectivement mise en avant, il est important de retourner, par exemple, faire des recherches dans nos sociétés traditionnelles et se pencher sur les anciens chefs traditionnels qui seraient encore vivants pour qu'ils nous expliquent mieux le fonctionnement de la démocratie dans nos sociétés respectives. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. My name is Ekande. I would like to add that we should ensure that whatever we are discussing here trickles down to the grassroots by including the wider civil society, including faith communities, Boda, Parental Association, etc. At least that will bring us close to what we've been attempting to discuss about making democracy work in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father Charles F. from the Catholic Church in Tanzania. Thank you for inviting me in this important conference. I have two suggestions. One, I think what we are trying to achieve takes us back to the year 1963 when we formed the liberation movement for Africa. After independence, decolonization, now we want to go democratic. So if the democracy should be something realistic, you who are the champions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Claude Biao here from Benin. I just wanted to make another suggestion about bridging a bridge between the civil society organizations and the private sector. I heard someone saying yesterday that democracy is an expensive enterprise, and it's true. And we can't sustain that enterprise with the civil society always going abroad for funds. It's also necessary that the civil society build links with the African's private sector, because the private sector wins and the private society both win from a democracy dividend, and both sides will find equal interest in funding and pushing forward that goal. So I wanted to make that suggestion as well.
Hello, I am Mohamed Lamin Sedi Khan, an African holding a Gambian passport. I have about 3 points. One, I think throughout this conference, we missed one critical point. We cannot talk about democracy without having democracy in political parties. So I will recommend that our resolution to be institutionalizing democracy in political parties, so that it can be institutionalized across Africa. The second point is more of, we committed to supporting social movements, and in supporting social movements, we support them to win and change. But the bigger lesson that we have seen over the years is that we have not been supporting the alternative system that we want to be in place. So most of the time when changes happen, when social movements defeat dictatorship, the same system reverses itself. We've seen authoritarian regimes coming back to power. And this is happening across Africa. So we need to think about how do we support alternative systems to be in place in terms of democracy. The third point is more of, we cannot achieve holistic democracy in Africa without advancing borderless Africa. We must achieve free movement of people. Somebody talked about it. We need to support that campaign and realize it in a timeline. Thank you.
My name is Ogada from Kenya. Thank you very much. It's been an engaging couple of days. I have certainly picked up a couple of vocabulary. Dr. Medicine, thank you for the latest entrant, deodorized dog shit. That was good. Now, moving forward, the networking is important. If we can organize from this platform, if it is agreeable to the organizers, let's have probably a mailing list, a WhatsApp group, Instagram, because we have shared problems. I was speaking to friends from Zambia yesterday and Uganda. Those of us who go to court, we have a lot of similarity in terms of challenges that can be shared. To the organizers, may I humbly and respectfully make a recommendation. My brother Don Dare is here, and I think he has been itching to say that. I'll say it on his behalf. The elders group is predominantly male. Is it possible that we bring on board former African female leaders? We have President Panza from Central African Republic. We have President Banda from Zambia, and a host of, from Malawi, and we have a host of former serving prime ministers, female prime ministers, so that ladies are part and parcel of the elders in Africa. That will be my recommendation. Thank you.
My proposal may seem a bit technocratic on the surface, but it serves a deeper consideration. It seems as though the resolutions from our past conferences were phrased with very passive language, recognize the importance of, recommit ourselves to, fill in the blank. So whatever we resolve to do here, let it be something that is specific and active so that we have work to do and a mandate to do it before the next conference. Otherwise, I will recommit myself by the end of today to recognizing, the importance of pre-colonial democratic practices instead of maybe, for example, rebuilding institutions of pre-colonial direct democracy, right? So I think the language for each resolution should be very specific and active.
Okay, thank you. This is from Ethiopia. I think it's very good. I try to emphasize on the question of solidarity. Of course, practicality is a question. We are always committing for solidarity. How it will be practical would be a matter of the coordinators, how they can take this forward in terms of. So we should be a little bit practical in that regard. So, but my main comment is that I felt a little bit isolated, mainly because the question of democratic regression is a global phenomenon. So it's hitting back Africa mainly because it has started from the West, where we took the model. So in the West, with the emergence of populist leaders, including the US, now it has hit back Africa as well. So in this regard, we're a little bit, I felt isolated from the rest of the world in our kind of recommendations. So could we put global, continental, and national coordination and solidarity? So because, whenever we were a little bit isolated, it will be also very comfortable for the dictators to hear us isolated. So I think we should also emphasize the global coordinations that we should put on board. And then the next question, the next comment that I have is that the question of also linking the academics. So when we talk about the academics, I am also from the academics. The main question is that we don't have the platform to really reach out to the mainstream, while the NGOs, the movements have the mouthpiece to really communicate the work of the academics. So it's not only about a grassroots or what we call organic academics, but also if we can try to create a linkage between the academics, the universities, and CSOs and the other who roll the programming part, then that will be more efficient to bring the innovative work of the academics to the democracy spectrum. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for the very wonderful comments. For me, really, 3 key institutions are important, and I want to see members of these institutions being represented in the next conference, because I believe that these three institutions are the key areas in which democratic coup is being perpetrated in Africa. One is the election management bodies. I would want to see the election management body of different countries being represented here. The second is the security agencies, and then the third is the judiciary. I think in the next conference, let us have people from high hierarchies from those places represented here, so they can directly pick up the message from this conference.
Thank you very much. I commend and I want to thank the organizers and supporters for this initiative.
Je voudrais ajouter.
And, okay, thank you. I was thanking the organizers and who support this initiative, which is unique, and we pray very much it can sustain. Second, my insight on this, I want to make sure that we understand that we needed to map, to name, to localize our local democracies, how it is named, how it is working at the grassroots. So these local democracies in our respective countries will help us even to generate knowledge about this participatory governance at the local level. Second is, of course, what have been said here. In the next invitees, we really need those who are the guardians of our constitutions and the Electoral Commission, even the political parties. Last is about participatory action research for our academics, really how it is rich to engage as an academic in a civil society organization. And those academics are naive, part of them. They don't know how it is rich very much to engage with civil society organization. So I'm pledging for more work around participatory action research and constructive engagement with the government, so we can live progressively our self-censorship and fears. Thank you.
Oui, je voudrais ajouter que dans la droite ligne du renforcement des instruments et mécanismes disponibles au niveau régional, je voudrais suggérer aux organisateurs pour les fois à venir de voir dans quelle mesure engager davantage les porteurs de responsabilité au niveau régional, c'est-à-dire Union africaine, Commission africaine, Cour africaine, au niveau sous-régional, la CEDEAO par exemple. Il y a ces gens-là qui, corrélativement aux instruments, ont certains mandats pour répondre de ce pourquoi nous sommes réunis ici. Donc déjà, c'est déjà bien que des anciens présidents et modèles relativement à la démocratie soient invités à l'ouverture. Mais après, ce serait intéressant qu'on engage davantage la volonté politique agissante actuellement au niveau régional dans l'organisation, enfin dans le déroulé de cette activité pour les prochaines fois. Merci.
Thank you so much to the conveners for this timely event. I think for me, my submission, during the whole entire event, I think the conversation of youth has really been paramount. And I think for me, my submission is for the establishment of something I am calling the D4D Youth Academy, which will be in form of an online leadership program that seeks to raise the next generation of young democratic leaders. I think it would really be a good thing where probably when young people are enrolled, the conveners can look into this of enrolling 50 young people per cohort. These young people are on a program for about 2 months, and it's basically online. They are trained on leadership matters, they are trained on democratic tenets, they are trained on issues around African politics and so on and so forth. They graduate, have a leap of 1 month, open up another call for application, have another segment of young people enrolled. I think that would really be something that can be beneficial to the convener.
Merci beaucoup. Bon. Moi, je suis Sofiane Belmessaoud, je viens d'Algérie, je suis maître de conférence, mais aussi avocat. Pour ma proposition, pour les résolutions, si vous les adoptez, bien sûr, et de travailler et bien veiller pour véhiculer la démocratie à travers des instruments comme la ZLECAF, la zone de libre-échange continentale en Afrique, véhiculer la démocratie par et pour les échanges économiques, mais aussi par l'appel à l'ouverture des frontières à travers, entre parenthèses, l'agenda 2063, c'est ça qui va permettre aux Africains pour échanger leur expertise, mais aussi pour la promotion et le bon exercice de la démocratie en Afrique. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Je m'appelle Maître Gérard Youssouf. Je viens des îles Comores. Je suis avocat, défenseur des droits de l'homme et aussi membre de la Commission électorale nationale indépendante. Je voudrais aussi remercier tous les intervenants pour les riches recommandations qui ont été faites. Et j'estime aussi qu'il serait judicieux, dans le cadre de cette résolution, de mettre l'accent sur la démocratie électorale. Car nous le savons, elle est une source de déstabilisation et de conflits en Afrique. Et comme nous le savons tous, dans les prochains mois, il y aura des élections à Madagascar, au Sénégal et aux Comores. Et à mon avis, il serait aussi important que nous essayions de mettre l'accent sur le mécanisme d'évaluation.
Rina de Madagascar. Ma recommandation par rapport à ce qu'on a déjà dit par les participants tout à l'heure, c'est que je pense qu'on a oublié la question de proximité par rapport aux résultats et les impacts de ce qu'on a discuté ici. Je pense qu'il est très très important de valoriser les acteurs locaux parce que une fois retourné à Madagascar par exemple, qu'est-ce que je peux faire pour qu'on mette en place une démocratie selon les ententes et le besoin de la population? On aura une élection par exemple le 9 novembre pour le premier tour et le 19 décembre le second tour. Et qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire pour qu'on peut mettre en place la démocratie électorale par exemple? Donc ma recommandation c'est que on insère dans notre déclaration que les acteurs locaux ont des rôles à jouer et avec l'appui par exemple de représentants ou une genre de comité de suivi d'ici qui va faire les plaidoyers localement. Parce qu'on parle de plateforme, oui, ça c'est une pratique courante et très utile, mais combien de personnes et combien de gens ont accès à ce genre de plateforme? Donc ça se limite au niveau de nous, les participants, qui pourraient apprendre de ce qu'on parle ici, mais sur les terrains, dans chaque pays, il faut également voir comment on peut faire et comment donc transmettre de ce que nous avons décidé ici, de ce que nous avons parlé ici et de partager ici. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Mine is just a statement to thank the conveners. This is my first time participating in the D4D, and I was very curious when I got the invitation. But I believe that this is time well spent. I want to share the information that the African Center for Democracy and Human Rights Studies convenes the Forum of NGOs that work with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And I want to restate our availability to collaborate with this forum and to also explore areas of possible collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. There's two contributions at the back, one to my right, yes, and another behind you, Tessa.
Bonjour tout le monde. Moi, ma recommandation, elle fera plus allusion à l'inclusivité. Bon, parce qu'on a le réseau Africa Drive for Democracy, il y a aussi la conférence annuelle qu'on tient actuellement. Mais peut-être au-delà, comme ici, il y a eu beaucoup de professeurs qui ont fait des cours magistraux. Nous les en remercions. Au-delà de ça, peut-être ouvrir le débat et avoir une plateforme où partager toutes ces connaissances. Pourquoi pas un MOOC, un Massive Open Online Course, pour partager toutes ces connaissances. Pourquoi je dis ça? Parce que nous, à Africtivist, on a un cours sur la démocratie, les élections et la gouvernance, et nous avons plus de 2000 apprenants. Parce qu'il faut savoir que tout le monde n'a pas l'opportunité d'aller à l'université et de faire des cours. Donc, il faut faire sortir cette connaissance et le partager avec les autres. Lamine Sedi Khan qui est ici nous a fait l'honneur de donner un cours dans ce MOOC d'ailleurs. Nous le remercions par rapport à ça. Donc ce serait super intéressant d'ouvrir la plateforme et d'engager plus les jeunes parce que nous sommes les leaders de demain, nous sommes l'avenir du continent. Merci beaucoup.
I would like to thank the D4D organizers for recognizing the contribution of art and artists for moving the wheel of democracy in Africa forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to thank the organizers of this event for bringing us here. Mine is a suggestion. As we all agree that democracy is expensive, I want to suggest that D4D should intensify efforts to tap from the potential that exists from Africa. I mean, in terms of high network individuals and the emerging foundations, philanthropic foundations. I just look at your donors, I see that there are not so many indigenous foundations. And these people, including the diaspora, have made so much. Africa has been so good to them. Even the democracy that is not working, they've made so much from the African soil. This is an opportunity for them to give back to Africa. So how do we reach out to them? I'm thinking about something like having a D4D trust, maybe where which will provide a platform for them to give back, so that this program and this conference will outlive most of us here. Thank you so much.
So once again, thank you so much for these wonderful comments, thoughts, feedback, as well as giving us guidelines so that we can be able to work on this statement. The elders retreat came up with a communique, all right, which was passed and adopted by the elders. So we, the conveners, are going to factor in all the comments and adopt it into this statement and share it with you as a People's Assembly, as a statement of commitment for the 3 days that we have had here. So once again, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you again next year. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Andrew. Thank you.
Let's thank Dennis. Thank you. Later tonight, we will have dinner at 7 p.m. So as you leave this place, please carry your bags, laptops, and whatever else you have, because the room is going to be rearranged for that purpose. We will also have a networking session, free, it's optional. Please meet people, connect, and all that, 2:30 to 5 p.m. That will be happening across the campus. And also from 14 hours, which is in an hour's time or so, refunds will be provided for those who paid their visa fees. And this will be happening in Zambia room. There's a room on campus called Zambia. So don't board a plane to go to Zambia to claim your visa refund. The refunds are being paid in a room called Zambia here on campus from 14 hours. That will be Beatrice and Abdul helping with that. That also applies to refunds for, and also leave this translation equipment on your table. Please do not leave the room with it. And that, the refunds also apply to ground transportation. So that will happen in Zambia room at 2 p.m. And I've said everything else I have to say in terms of announcements. Please welcome Makena Mobobia, Executive Director, MS Training Center for Development Corporation, to give the closing remarks of this conference.
Good afternoon. It's that bad. Good afternoon. I just decided to jot my notes because the other day I was watching TV and one of our great African leaders was having an international press conference, and out of the blue, he asked the journalist. So I didn't want to ask you if you have had your lunch while I was seated with you in this room. But let me just start my statement with quoting again a great man of Africa who said, some people think that being in government for a long time is a bad thing. But the more you stay, the more you learn. I am now an expert in governance. I'll let you know who said that. Yes, that was, of course, our famous Museveni, so we need to bring him in the room. So let me say a few words on behalf of the hosting partners, that is the Center for Strategic Litigation, Institute of Security Studies, and MST-CDC. It is with immense gratitude that I stand here before you this afternoon to deliver this. Your presence has been critical for this conference. Your insightful comments have made this conference truly enriching, and we thank you all. Again, let me extend my sincere appreciation to our dedicated and wavering partners who have sponsored this conference and whose invaluable support and thoughts have made this conference possible. I think you can see from the banner, grateful for the generous support of our donors, but I want to call them partners at this point, and I would really kindly ask them to stand, their representatives, to just stand wherever you are, so that we say thank you so much. Ford Foundation, Wellspring Philanthropic Fund, Open Society, Swedish International Development Agency, Luminate, Freedom House, Akina Mama Africa, Friedrich Naumann Foundation, that is FNF, and the Institute of Security Studies. A better hand clap to our partners. Thank you, you may sit. Thank you very much. I just want to say that your commitment, dear partners, to advancing the Africa Drive for Democracy initiative is commendable, and we are grateful for your partnership in making this conference a success. We look forward to the next steps as we take the initiative a notch higher in making such the recommendations that we have just had that will help us to develop a roadmap and a program that will make sure this initiative is not another show talk, but a program that will bring a new dawn for Africa, especially to the youth. A special appreciation goes out again, and this one I'm going to call all the staff from CSL, from ISS, and MST-CDC, wherever you are, please stand. All the staff, wherever you are. Some of you are outside. We'll request you to come inside. Please do. Keep standing, please. Andrew and Adera, please stand. I just want to say that no words. Thank you very much. The reason I just asked the staff to stand, my friends, you have never seen a dedicated, hard-working staff whose tireless efforts, I would use the word meticulous planning and attention to detail, have ensured that everything has run seamlessly. To my dear staff, to the staff of the 3 institutions, we just want to appreciate and say your passion and dedication has been very exemplary, and we owe you a debt of gratitude. Thanks once again. And I just want to say there are 2 dynamic young ladies. I don't know where there's one that we call Mother N, Belina and Adera. I just want these 2 ladies to stand. Belina and Adela, where are you? Adera, I can see, please stand. And because these are two, why are you shy today, Adera, and the way you bully me at midnight? Yes, I just, yes. Please, kindly, I just wanted the two of you to stand here. And I'm just, please do stand here. I'm being unfair to all other staff members, but I have a special bond with them because they're the only two who can text me at midnight and at 5 in the morning. And this is how you have found the conference running. So thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your hard work. We know sometimes we have been very harsh to you. We ask that you may forgive us. But I just want to say, staff members, wherever you're seated, we appreciate you, because if we have to change Africa, change starts with us, commitment starts with us, dedication starts with us, and you are a role model to us. We really want to say thank you, staff members. Thank you, Belina and Adera. Again, let me just extend the gratitude in their absence, the President of the United Republic of Tanzania, who inaugurated the D4D Elders Retreat, His Excellency Koroma, the Chair of the Africa Democracy Initiative, His Excellency Chisano, His Excellency Jakaya Kikwete, and His Excellency the Prime Minister for Ethiopia, Desalegn, for sharing with us their experiences, insights, and how we can contribute towards the better Africa that we want. And to quote one of them, said, there is no alternative to democracy. Moreover, I thank the session presenters. You'd agree with me, we have seen wonderful presenters, facilitators, preparation that has gone to this, the expert in this room, knowledge, and the willingness to share that has shaped the high-quality content of this conference. We will continue getting better by the commitment that we have seen. You have inspired and challenged us to go and explore more of the respective topics as you have just done. We will say Africa's solutions will come from the great minds that are represented in this room and the minds that we have not been able to reach out. I cannot forget again, and here I want to be a little bit selfish because I believe we have eaten well. We have seen a campus that is so clean. We have seen the hospitality that the staff at TCDC staff do give, and I just want to feel selfish at this moment to say I want to recognize the hospitality team, the kitchen team, the guys who are keeping the compound green. I just want to say thank you, TCDC staff, for you teach me humbleness and commitment, especially for the role that you do to maintain the standard of TCDC. Thank you again, my colleagues. I do say thank you to the technical teams. I think you have seen a wonderful technical team, the running of the shows, the movies. I call them movies from where I come from. They tell me I'm too analog to understand what they are doing. The translators, by the way, I have 6 grandchildren, so I qualify to be an analog. And so I want to say that the translators, thank you so much. Everybody that have not touched behind the scenes, thank you so much for your hard work, and we appreciate your work. Again, special thanks to the young people of Africa who are represented in this room. And I would like to say, anybody, let me see if, I hope I'm going to be proved right if I say anybody below 35. I know in Africa we don't like saying a bit age. Anybody below 35, could you stand so that we celebrate you below 35? Fantastic. Please help me to celebrate the generation that is going to lead Africa to another side. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to the government of Tanzania, again, for making it possible for us. I know my colleagues, some of them And I want to particularly talk about Tessa, Andrew, and Dr. Nico. You've been amazing. But I don't know if you noticed that Andrew was provoking us a lot with some deeper questions. And we say thank you for making us think about serious things with a sense of humor. Of course, I do not forget our comedians for last night and the music. And definitely any African who does not dance, I would like you to see me later. I used to be a teacher, then we can discuss about your lesson plan in terms of becoming a dancer. Music is medicine. For those of us who have, sometimes when you're feeling low, just play music. And I remember one of my mentors said, do not play Bob Marley in the morning because that's what you will be for the day. So you need to be careful what you're doing. Let me finish because I talk a lot and I realize if I don't put my thoughts together, I may take another 1 hour and Andrew will do the needful later. So to conclude, as we conclude the conference, let us carry forward the ideas, networking and inspirations we have gained and let them ignite our actions as we continue to work together, challenging each other to make the desired impact in Africa. As one of us said yesterday, time is not on our side. And one of us told us this morning when the young team was here, remember to shake your neighbors. So thank you all for making this conference the beginning of an incredible journey that is ahead of